A low thrum, a distant vibration in the late morning air, swelled into a visceral roar that rattled the very bedrock of the old stone church. Each year, on the third Saturday of May, the Brotherhood descended upon Fairhaven. Their pilgrimage wasn't for salvation, but a solemn remembrance. Deacon Silas, his spine a gnarled map of age, gripped his worn Bible tighter. 30 years of leather and chrome had passed before his eyes, yet their presence still jarred against the serenity of the memorial garden. Today, though, a different anxiety coiled in his gut, unrelated to the impending two-wheeled invasion. His gaze drifted to the small figure perched on the stone bench, her legs swinging idly inches above the ground. Lily, her bright red backpack, sporting a cartoon unicorn, stood out like a defiant splash of color against the somber backdrop of polished granite and weathered bronze. She was early, uncharacteristically so. Usually, her grandmother, a woman whose grief had hardened into a quiet, unyielding resolve, would lead her here. But today, Lily was alone, a small metallic object clutched in her tiny fist. The first motorcycles peeled off Main Street, a gleaming procession of chrome and dark leather. They parked with practiced precision, forming a crescent around the memorial garden. Their leader, a man built like a lumberjack named Grizz, dismounted with a grunt. His once raven hair was now streaked with silver, the weight of years and battles etched into his very being. But it was his eyes that always captivated Silas, a piercing blue that held both profound sorrow and unshakable loyalty. Grizz removed his helmet, the wind ruffling his thinning strands. He paused, a customary gesture, to survey the names incised into the black marble. His gaze snagged on one particular inscription, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. The other Brotherhood members fanned out, some igniting candles, others simply standing in quiet homage. The air, typically redolent with exhaust and old leather, now carried the faint scent of burning wax and damp earth. Then Lily moved. She slid from the bench, her small sneakers barely disturbing the gravel path. Her unwavering gaze was fixed on Grizz. She moved with a quiet determination that belied her size, a tiny vessel navigating a sea of giants. Grizz, lost in his private reverie, didn't notice her at first. He reached into his vest pocket, extracting a small tarnished flask, a ritualistic, silent toast to the fallen. Lily stopped a few feet from him, tilting her head back to peer up at his imposing frame. She didn't speak. Instead, she extended her hand, palm open, revealing the dull gleam of metal. Grizz, mid-uncork, froze. He looked down, his eyes narrowing slightly. Not in anger, but in profound confusion. He saw the small hand, the metal object. He saw Lily's pale, serious face, her wide eyes holding an unnerving intensity. Slowly, he lowered the flask. He took the dog tag. Its cold weight settled in his palm. His thumb traced its familiar, serrated edge. He didn't need to read it. He knew its feel, its particular wear. Yet he looked, his eyes scanning the embossed letters. Sergeant A.M. Collins. Blood type O-neg, religion, none. The words blurred. The world tilted. A dry, agonizing choke caught in his throat. He blinked, trying to clear the sudden fog from his vision. 20 years. 20 years he'd harbored the ghost of Al Collins, the man who'd shielded him from a spray of bullets, saving his life. 20 years of silence, of guilt, of a bond forged in fire and sealed in blood. And now, this. He looked from the dog tag to the girl, his mind reeling. Her eyes, so like Al's, stared back with unnerving calm. "That was my daddy," Lily said, her voice a small, clear bell. In the sudden, hushed silence that had fallen over the memorial. Even the distant city sounds seemed to recede. He wrote about you in his letters. He said if anything happened to him, I should find you. The flask slipped from Griz's fingers, clattering on the gravel. The sound, amplified in the profound stillness, was shockingly loud. His chest tightened, a crushing weight of disbelief and a grief that felt impossibly fresh. Al had a daughter. All these years, all these goddamn years. He'd pictured Al's parents, his sister, but never a child who'd carried this secret, this sacred trust, for what must have been her entire life. Tears, hot and unstoppable, streamed down his weathered cheeks. He made no effort to hide them. The other bikers, who had turned at the sound of the falling flask, watched in stunned silence. They had seen Grizz rage, seen him fight, seen him mourn, but never like this. Never so utterly broken. Lily, still as a statue, watched him cry. Her small hand, which had cradled the dog tag for so long, now reached out, a tentative gesture. She didn't touch him, just held her hand open, as if offering a silent comfort, a shared burden. He said you were brave, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but ringing with profound conviction. He said you were his best friend. Grizz sank to his knees, heedless of the rough gravel. The dog tag, now a burning brand in his hand, felt heavier than a boulder. He looked up at this tiny girl, a living echo of the man he'd lost, a testament to a life he'd never known existed. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Al Collins hadn't just saved his life that day. He'd left behind a legacy, a piece of himself that had been searching for connection for 20 long years, without him ever knowing. The raw, guttural sob that tore from his throat was not just for Al, but for all the lost years, for the silent, lonely pilgrimage this child had made, carrying a father's memory and a desperate hope. A small hand, a heavy tag. The cool metal of the dog tag, still retaining Lily's faint warmth, felt impossibly weighty in Grizz's calloused hand. A simple disc, yet it bore the full burden of his 2 decades of grief. Silence draped over them, thick as a shroud, broken only by the distant murmur of the memorial service. Lily, her chin barely cresting his belt buckle, observed him with an ancient, patient wisdom in her eyes. He flipped the tag, his thumb tracing the engraved letters. Alan R. Collins. A name scorched into his memory, a specter haunting his waking hours and fractured sleep. Below it, a service number he knew by heart. O positive. Then, an almost imperceptible shiver ran through him. At the sight of a faded tiny cross, Al had never openly professed faith. Al. The name emerged as a choked whisper, ripped from a throat constricted by unshed tears. He focused on the girl, truly seeing her for the first time. The slight tilt of her head, the way her hair, the precise shade of sun-bleached wheat, cascaded across her shoulder. The gentle curve of her cheek, an echo of Al's own youthful grin. It was all there, undeniable. "That was my daddy," Lily said, her voice a soft current against the roar in his ears. No shouts, no demands, just a simple truth that had just irrevocably reshaped his universe. He wrote about you in his letters. Grizz's vision blurred. Letters? Al penning letters? The Al he knew, the man who'd sooner wrestle a bear than touch a pen, had meticulously chronicled tales of him? The thought was a fresh wound, a twisting pain both exquisite and agonizing. He wrote about me?" Lily nodded, her gaze unwavering. "He said if anything happened to him, I should find you." She delved into the pocket of her worn denim jacket, producing a small dog-eared notebook. Its cover faded, pages brittle with age. She extended it to him, a silent offering. He called you Grizzly Bear in them. The nickname, a relic from a life now distant, struck him with the force of a physical blow. He remembered Al's laughter, his teasing during basic training. You're like a big, grumpy grizzly bear, Grizz, but a lovable one. He'd loathed it then, but now it felt like a lifeline to a past he'd considered forever lost. He didn't immediately take the notebook. His hands, usually so steady, trembled violently. He glanced around, suddenly aware of the other mourners, the respectful space they afforded, the quiet hum of their conversations. None of them, he realized with a pang, comprehended the seismic shift occurring on this hallowed ground. Al, he never said, Grizz began, his voice raspy, trailing off. He never mentioned a child, never spoke of a wife, a girlfriend, anyone. Al had been a lone wolf, a drifter even before the war. This revelation wasn't just a surprise. It was a betrayal of the narrative he'd constructed for 2 decades, a story of a solitary hero, a friend whose sacrifice had left no one behind but him. Lily's small hand reached out, gently closing his fingers around the dog tag. He wanted you to know, she said, her voice softer still. He wanted me to know you. The implication hung in the air. Al, even in his final moments, had been thinking of them both, of the legacy he'd leave behind, the connection he hoped would endure. The thought fractured something inside Grizz. The carefully constructed walls around his grief, the hardened shell he'd worn for years, shattered. Tears, hot and stinging, finally breached the dam. They traced rivulets down his weathered cheeks, a stark contrast to the rough stubble of his beard. He made no attempt to hide them. He didn't care. The girl, this small, brave girl who carried the weight of her father's memory and her own silent pilgrimage, deserved his raw, unvarnished truth. He knelt, his knees protesting with a dull ache, bringing himself to her level. His eyes, now red-rimmed and glistening, met hers. Your daddy, he managed, his voice thick with emotion. He was the best man I ever knew. Lily's lips curved into a tiny, sad smile. I know, she whispered. He wrote that about you, too. The world for Grizz tilted on its axis. 20 years of guilt, of solitary mourning, of believing he was the sole keeper of Al's memory, dissolved in that instant. This child, his friend's child, had grown up without her father, yet she knew him. She carried him, not just in her heart, but in her stories, in his letters, in the very essence of her being. And she had been looking for him, for Grizz, for a connection to the man who'd saved his life. The realization was a devastating, beautiful ache. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment, then gently rested it on her shoulder. The weight of her small presence was a new kind of burden, but one he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, he would carry with every fiber of his being. Daddy's letters. The album's worn leather cover, substantial in Grizz's calloused hands, seemed to hold the weight of years. Lily, a small figure perched on the armchair's edge, watched him with an intense gaze that belied her youthful frame. The hushed living room, sparsely furnished, vibrated with unspoken anticipation. He eased the cover open. The stiff pages whispered a faint crinkle of protest. Faded sepia captured Al in the first few photographs, young, radiant, a vibrant force frozen in time. Then came the letters, neatly stacked and bound with a faded blue ribbon, a tangible bridge to a past Grizz had meticulously entombed. He selected the topmost envelope. Al's familiar, slightly slanted script was instantly recognizable. To Lily, if I don't make it home. Griz's throat tightened. He unfolded the letter, its aged paper brittle. My dearest Lily, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to tell you myself. I want you to know about my best friend, Grizz. He's a good man, Lily. A little rough around the edges, maybe, but he's got a heart bigger than anyone I know. He saved my life more times than I can count. He'll look out for you, I promise. A tremor ran through Grizz. Al hadn't merely mentioned him. He'd entrusted his daughter's welfare to him. This burden of trust, 2 decades overdue, settled deep within his chest. He met Lily's wide, unwavering gaze. He said I'd look out for you, his voice raw. Lily nodded, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. He always said you were his rock. He continued reading, each word a vivid brushstroke, painting a life Grizz had only glimpsed in fragments. Al recounted Lily's first steps, her insatiable curiosity, the off-key hum of her happiness. He detailed hopes for her future, his yearning to witness her growth. A profound ache enveloped Grizz, not just for Al's lost years, but for the years he hadn't known Lily. As he progressed through the stack, the letters shifted in tone, particularly those penned during deployments. Al's reflections on camaraderie, the terror of combat, and an unshakable faith in Grizz's loyalty spilled onto the pages. One letter vividly described a near-fatal incident, a spray of enemy fire, and Grizz's instantaneous dive to shield him. He never hesitated, Lily. That's the kind of man he is. He'd do anything for those he cares about. Grizz paused, a sheen of tears blurring the script. He remembered that day. The searing pain in his arm, the ringing in his ears, Al's frantic shouts. He'd never considered it an act of extraordinary heroism, simply instinct for a brother. Yet Al, with his quiet wisdom, had seen it differently. He'd seen the core of who Grizz was, a core Grizz had tried to bury. He really wanted us to meet, Lily murmured, her voice breaking the quiet reverence. He wrote about you often, even in the later letters, after the war. He said you'd understand him like no one else. Grizz closed the album, his eyes fixed on Lily. He was right. The words were a revelation, a confession. For 20 years, he'd believed himself the sole custodian of Al's memory, the only one who truly grasped the toll of their shared past. Now, here was Lily, a living testament to Al's enduring spirit, offering a different, fuller narrative. The final letter was distinct. Not addressed to Lily, it was tucked inside a smaller envelope marked for Grizz. His hands trembled as he opened it. Grizz, if Lily finds this and finds you, it means I'm gone. Don't blame yourself. You were the best friend a man could ask for. Please look out for my girl. Tell her stories about me, the good ones. Tell her how much I loved her. And know this, brother. I went out knowing I had a true friend in you. Don't carry this burden alone anymore. Live. For both of us. A choked sob escaped Grizz. The floodgates, long held shut, finally burst. 20 years of guilt, grief, and self-imposed isolation washed over him. He wasn't alone. Al hadn't wanted him to be. He had wanted him to connect with Lily, to share their stories, to heal. Lily, without a word, moved from the armchair and sat beside him on the sofa, her small hand resting gently on his arm. Her touch was warm, comforting, a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding that transcended speech. In that moment, surrounded by the echoes of Al's love and faith, a fragile sense of hope blossomed within the barren landscape of Grizz's heart. The journey ahead was uncharted, but for the first time in a very long time, he no longer felt he walked it alone. He had a purpose, a new mission from Al. He had Lily, the weight of a secret. Lily's small hand closed around the cool, smooth dog tag. She traced the familiar, worn letters of her father's name, the metal warming beneath her palm. Its negligible weight felt monumental in her grasp. Weeks of anticipation culminated in this moment. Ever since unearthing the old ammunition box from beneath a loose floorboard in her mother's closet. Inside, nestled amidst faded roses and sepia-toned photographs, lay the letters. Her mother, Sarah, had explained them with deliberate slowness, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He wrote these for you, honey, for when you were old enough to understand." These were no tales of bedtime or scraped knees. They were a raw, searing chronicle of a man's love, a soldier's regret, and a friend's unwavering loyalty. Al had rendered Grizz with an almost sacred admiration, detailing their unbreakable bond through unspeakable horrors, and Grizz's ultimate sacrifice for him. He'd painted Grizz not as a distant myth, but as a vibrant, breathing protector, a man with a booming laugh and a heart as boundless as the desert sky. Each letter concluded with a desperate plea: "If anything ever happens to me, find Grizz. He'll know what to do. He'll look after you." Today was that day. Sarah, pale yet resolute, had driven Lily to the sprawling Veterans Memorial, a place Lily had only ever glimpsed in pictures. The air resonated with the hushed reverence of the crowd, the gentle rustle of flags, and the distant, mournful strain of a lone bugle. Lily's gaze swept across the solemn faces, searching for the man her father had so vividly described. Her stomach churned with a primal mix of dread and a peculiar, unwavering hope. Then she saw him, a hulking silhouette, more granite than flesh, enveloped in black leather. His shoulders, immense and powerful, bore arms etched with intricate tattoos that peeked from beneath rolled-up sleeves. A thick, grizzled beard, streaked with silver, framed a face seemingly chiseled from rock. He stood apart, a lone sentinel, his gaze riveted on the names carved into the polished stone. This had to be Grizz, the man her father had entrusted above all others. Drawing a ragged breath that caught in her throat, Lily advanced. Each step felt leaden, as if the very earth resisted her progress. Reaching him, she stopped, her head barely grazing his elbow. Without a word, she extended her hand, the dog tag resting in her open palm. Grizz, lost in a labyrinth of 2-decade-old specters, felt a light pressure against his leg. He looked down, his eyes, typically hard and remote, widening almost imperceptibly at the sight of the small girl. Her eyes, an astonishing shade of blue, met his with an unwavering intensity that defied her youth. He frowned, wondering at her purpose. Then his gaze dropped to the dog tag in her outstretched hand. He took it, his calloused fingers brushing hers. The metal was cool, achingly familiar. His breath hitched as he focused on the engraved name, Alan Al Miller. The world tilted on its axis. The memorial's sounds receded, replaced by a roaring silence in his ears. His vision blurred. The chiseled names on the memorial wall dissolved into an indistinct haze. Al, his Al, the man he'd carried in his heart, a constant searing wound for 2 decades, the man he'd failed. A single tear, hot and defiant, blazed a trail through the dust on his cheek. Then another, and another, until his sight was completely obscured. He hadn't wept in 20 years, not once. But here, now, before this child, the dam shattered. The grief, the guilt, the raw, unadulterated agony of Al's loss surged forth, a tsunami threatening to drown him. Lily watched, her own eyes welling. She had never seen such a large, strong man cry. It was unsettling, yet paradoxically comforting. It meant he knew her father, truly knew him. When his sobs finally subsided, leaving him gasping for air, she spoke, her voice a soft whisper that somehow pierced the lingering quiet. "That was my daddy." Grizz looked at her, his eyes bloodshot, his face a roadmap of raw emotion. Your daddy?" he croaked, the words barely audible. He shook his head, a confused frown marring his features. Al had never mentioned a daughter. Never. "He wrote about you in his letters," Lily continued, her voice gaining a fragile strength. "He said if anything happened to him, I should find you." She reached into her pocket and produced a small, folded stack of aged paper, tied with a faded ribbon. "He said you'd know what to do. He said you'd look after me." Grizz stared at the letters, then back at the girl, his mind reeling. Al had a daughter he'd never known existed, a daughter who had searched for him, bearing the weight of her father's legacy, her father's unspoken trust, for years. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow. All those years, he'd wallowed in his own misery, convinced he had nothing left, no one to protect. And all the while, Al's daughter, a living testament to his best friend, had been out there, a ghost he'd never known existed. His chest tightened, a fresh wave of agony washing over him. It wasn't merely the grief of Al's death anymore. It was the crushing weight of 2 decades of missed connections, of a life Al had lived beyond their shared existence, of a child who had grown up without a father's touch, unaware of the man who had loved him most. He knelt, his knees protesting, bringing himself to her level. He extended a trembling hand and gently touched her hair. "Lily," he whispered, the name a benediction. "Your father. He was a good man, the best." He met her gaze, seeing Al's spirit reflected there, a spark of hope in the desolate landscape of his own heart. "I promise you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll look after you." The secret, finally unveiled, had shattered his world. Yet in its fragmentation, he glimpsed the faint shimmering possibility of redemption. A promise made. The cool, familiar weight of the dog tag, still carrying the faint warmth of Lily's small hand, seared itself into Grizz's palm. His gaze met hers, the nascent morning light illuminating the gold flecks in her serious eyes. Eyes that mirrored Al's defiant spirit. A gravelly sound escaped his throat. "Al, he knew you'd find me." It was an assertion, a realization solidifying. Al, ever the strategist, ever the sentinel. Lily gave a slow nod, her grip tightening on the worn leather of her satchel. "He said you'd know what to do. He said you'd understand." She paused, then produced a thick, age-softened envelope. "These are for you." Grizz accepted it, his fingers fumbling slightly. The paper rustled, and an almost phantom scent rose to him. Al's old leather jacket, wood smoke, and something uniquely, ineffably Al. He looked down at his own name, Grizz, scrawled in that familiar, confident hand. His eyes stung, a familiar ache blooming in his chest. 2 decades. 2 decades he'd endured the chasm of Al's absence. And now, here was his voice, resurrected. Lily remained a quiet sentinel, the air between them, dense with unvoiced history and raw emotion, thrummed with a strange resonance. Grizz unfolded the first letter. Al's words, unadorned and direct, pulled Grizz back to sun-baked landscapes and the rhythmic churn of chopper blades. Al wrote of his hopes, his quiet anxieties, of dreams for a future Grizz had never imagined he'd build alone. but predominantly, he wrote of Lily, her first faltering steps, her infectious, bubbling laughter, her resolute stubbornness. Grizz could almost hear Al's voice, a touch deeper, a shade more seasoned, yet unequivocally Al. He gleaned details of Al's quiet pride, his fierce protectiveness, his boundless affection for the daughter he'd held for such a brief, cherished time. These letters were not merely records. They were a vibrant testament to a life Grizz had mourned as lost, a life that had continued, rich and full of love, even after his own world had fractured. A profound internal shift began, a tectonic plate of grief slowly grinding against a newly forming bedrock of purpose. The guilt, a constant companion and dull throb beneath his ribs, began to recede, replaced by an undeniable, fierce surge of protectiveness. Al hadn't simply asked him to watch over Lily. He had bequeathed her a sacred charge. He said, "You'd tell me about him." Lily's voice, a soft murmur, broke the stillness. The real him, not just the soldier. He said you knew him best. Grizz looked up, his vision momentarily blurred. He conjured 1,000 memories. Al's booming laugh, the shared last cigarette, his unwavering loyalty. The fierce glint in Al's eyes when he spoke of family, of home. He was the best of us, kid. Brave, loyal, stubborn as hell, but always there. Always. He swallowed hard, the words catching. And he loved you more than anything, more than life itself. Lily's lower lip trembled, but she maintained her composure. He said you rode motorcycles. Big ones. A ghost of a smile touched Grizz's lips. Yeah, we did. Had some good times on those roads. He glanced at the dog tag again, then back at Lily. He made me promise. 20 years ago. He said if anything ever happened, I was to look after you. Said you'd be a handful, but worth it. The words were Al's, nearly verbatim, echoing from a distant memory, a casual conversation under a starlit desert sky. Lily's eyes widened, a flicker of nascent hope igniting within their depths. He did. Grizz reached out, his calloused hand gently touching her shoulder. And a promise to Al. That's a promise I keep. The words settled between them, a silent vow hanging in the crisp morning air. The weight in Grizz's chest hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. No longer the leaden burden of regret, but the solid anchor of responsibility, of a purpose reignited. He looked at the vast, silent memorial, names etched into stone, and felt Al's presence, not as a haunting specter, but as a guiding star. The road ahead would be unfamiliar, fraught with challenges, but for the first time in 2 decades, Grizz wasn't walking it alone. He had a promise to uphold and a daughter to protect. Stories from the past. The late afternoon sun sliced through Grizz's garage, illuminating motes of dust that danced like forgotten constellations. Lily, perched cross-legged on a well-worn leather armchair, carefully turned the brittle pages of an old photo album. A rhythmic rasp of sandpaper against metal from Grizz's workbench provided a counterpoint to the soft rustle of paper. He felt a familiar pang, a phantom echo of the grief that had shadowed him for 2 decades, now subtly warmed by her presence. He was so young here, Lily murmured, tracing a finger over a faded snapshot of a grinning Al, barely 20, beside a gleaming Harley. Did he always love motorcycles? Grizz grunted, a faint smile playing on his lips. Since before he could walk, probably. His old man had one. I'd sit on it, making engine noises, even when it was parked. Memories burbled to the surface like bubbles in a murky pool. He used to call it his iron horse, said it'd take him anywhere he wanted to go. Lily looked up, her eyes wide with curiosity. Did it? Grizz's gaze drifted to the framed photo of Al on his desk, snapped just before Vietnam. Some places, others he never returned from. The easy camaraderie in the garage thickened, laden with the unspoken weight of their shared history. Later, as twilight bled into bruised purple, they gravitated to the kitchen. Grizz cooked, the air soon fragrant with sizzling onions and garlic. Lily, perched on a stool, continued her excavation of Al's belongings, especially the letters, many of which she'd already read, her father's vibrant, loving voice resonating across the decades. Still, untouched stacks remained. Here's one from when he was deployed, she announced, extracting a thin airmail-stamped envelope from a ribbon-bound bundle. It's addressed to My Dearest Lilybug. Her voice softened, a wistful note entwined within it. She began to read, her tone steady at first, then faltering as the words painted a stark portrait of a young man far from home, clinging to the fragile hope of return. He writes about the heat, the endless patrols. Lily's voice was barely a whisper. And he says, every night I look up at the stars and I imagine you looking at the same ones. It makes the distance feel a little less, even if just for a moment. Hold on to that, my sweet girl. We'll be under those stars together again soon. A lone tear traced a path down her cheek. Grizz, stirring a pot of chili, felt a familiar constriction in his throat. He remembered those letters, the way Al would pour out his soul, trying to bridge the impossible chasm between a war zone and the innocent world he'd left behind. He'd helped Al seal many of them, watched him scribble the addresses, a desperate hope shining in his eyes. Grizz cleared his throat. He always did that. Tried to find something beautiful, even amidst the hell. He ladled chili into bowls, the steam briefly clouding his vision. He never wanted you to feel any of the ugliness he saw. Lily nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. He just wanted me to be happy. She looked at Grizz, a new intensity sparking in her gaze. He also wrote about you, about how you always had his back, about the time you pulled him out of that burning Humvee. Grizz flinched, the memory a vivid, searing brand. He'd never truly spoken of that day, not in detail. He'd carried the weight of Al's death and the guilt of his own survival for too long. He exaggerated, he mumbled, trying to wave it off. No, he didn't, Lily insisted, her voice firm. He said you saved his life, right before he saved yours. He said you were more than a friend, that you were family. He said if anything ever happened to him, you'd make sure I was safe. She held his gaze, her young eyes full of a trust that both humbled and terrified him. He made you promise, didn't he? The air in the kitchen crackled with unspoken truths. Grizz set down his spoon, the metal clattering against the countertop. He looked at Lily, truly saw her, and recognized not just Al's daughter, but a piece of Al himself, resilient and unwavering. The promise, long buried beneath layers of pain and isolation, resurfaced, sharp and undeniable. It was no longer a burden, but a responsibility he now welcomed, a sacred trust. Yeah, he finally said, his voice raw with emotion. He did, and I will. The silence that followed wasn't oppressive, but poised. It was the hush before a new journey, a nascent purpose. The last rays of the setting sun painted the kitchen in hues of orange and purple, a gentle farewell to old grief, and a welcoming of the new, unexpected dawn. A new presence. The rhythmic clatter from the garage had woven itself into the fabric of Grizz's days, Not the frantic, stressed beats of a troubled engine, but the steady, inquisitive hum of Lily's learning. Today, the familiar tang of oil and metal was softened by a subtle sweetness, a lingering whisper of floral hand cream from Lily's recent foray into carburetor diagnostics. She stood, a grease smudge accentuating her cheek, a gleaming wrench held with the grace of a scepter. "See?" she announced, her voice bright with achievement. "Just needed a little coaxing." She gestured to the reassembled engine, once a forgotten four-stroke relic Grizz had destined for scrap, now gleaming with renewed purpose on the workbench. Grizz offered a noncommittal grunt, a sound that could mean anything from approval to mere acknowledgement. He leaned against the doorframe, observing her. Her absolute focus, that intense furrow in her brow, mirrored a single-mindedness he'd once known in Al. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed that particular brand of dedication until it resurfaced in his quiet world. "You got a good touch," he finally offered, the words feeling a little rusty on his tongue. Lily's smile, a genuine burst of sunshine, was her reply. Later, as the afternoon shadows stretched long, they shared the porch swing. The rhythmic squeak of the chains provided a counterpoint to the comfortable quiet. Lily, rather than poring over her father's letters, was engrossed in a small notebook, her pencil scratching softly. Grizz, breaking his usual vigil of the road, found himself watching her instead. He noted how her hair caught the fading light, the faint dusting of freckles across her nose. She wasn't merely Al's legacy. She was a vibrant, distinct individual. "You know, Al used to draw," Grizz mused, the words escaping before he could reclaim them. Lily looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Really? What did he draw?" "Anything. Everything. Mostly bikes, I guess. He had a way of making them leap off the page even when they were just still images." Grizz leaned forward, a faint, nostalgic smile playing on his lips. "He once drew me on my first Harley. Made me look like some kind of god. Not just a skinny kid with bad tattoos." Lily's giggle, a sound rarely heard around Grizz, resonated deep within him. "Did he ever draw you two together?" Grizz shook his head. "Nah. He was always too busy making me look cool. Said I needed the confidence boost." He chuckled, a genuine rumbling sound that even surprised himself. The next morning, Lily presented her idea. "There's an old barn down the road," she began, a vague wave of her hand indicating the gravel path. "It's falling apart, but the framework looks sturdy. We could fix it up." Grizz raised an eyebrow, a silent question. "For what?" Lily's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "A workshop. A proper one. Al always wanted one, didn't he? Somewhere to build bikes, to tinker without getting oil on the kitchen table." She looked at him expectantly, her zeal infectious. "We could even put a lift in there, and a proper paint booth." Grizz glanced at the barn, barely visible through the trees. A skeletal wreck with a sagging roof and missing siding. It would be a colossal undertaking. He'd long since abandoned such ambitious projects, content with the bare necessities of his small garage. But Lily's vision was sharp, undimmed by the years of cynicism that had encrusted his own. "That's a lot of work, kid," he grumbled, his voice gruff, yet devoid of its usual dismissiveness. "I know," Lily replied, undeterred. "But think of it, Grizz. A place just for bikes. For our bikes." The possessive pronoun, "our," hung in the air, a quiet affirmation of their burgeoning partnership. He considered it. The thought of pouring sweat and effort into something new, something that wasn't merely about survival, felt foreign. Yet the idea of building something alongside her, a space that would hum with creative energy, a place where Al's spirit might find solace, held an unexpected allure. All right, he finally acquiesced, pushing himself off the porch swing. But you're doing the heavy lifting. A flicker of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. Lily let out a joyous whoop, a sound that sent a flock of startled sparrows fluttering from the eaves. She hugged him fiercely, her small frame surprisingly strong. Grizz, stiff and unused to such open affection, patted her awkwardly on the back. But a warmth, unfamiliar yet welcome, spread through his chest. The old barn might be crumbling, but something new, something vital, was clearly taking shape right here, within these weathered walls. He realized, with a jolt, that his promise to Al wasn't just about protecting Lily. He was, unwittingly, building a future with her. A future that suddenly felt less empty, less silent. Wisdom from the preacher. The rumble of Grizz's Road King smoothed out as he pulled into the gravel lot of the small whitewashed church. Sunday mornings weren't typically on his agenda, but the preacher's call had been insistent, laced with a tone Grizz recognized as non-negotiable. He cut the engine, the sudden quiet amplifying the chirping of crickets and the distant caw of a crow. Lily, perched behind him, slid off the seat, her eyes wide as she took in the unassuming edifice. She wore a clean, albeit slightly oversized, denim jacket over a floral dress, a concession to the occasion. "He's a good man, Lily," Grizz said, sensing her apprehension. "Knew your dad well." Inside, the air was cool, smelling faintly of old wood and beeswax. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colorful rhomboids across the worn wooden pews. The preacher, a man whose silver hair matched his gentle eyes, was already waiting, a warm smile creasing his weathered face. He greeted them both with a firm handshake, his gaze lingering on Lily with an unspoken kindness. "Grizz, it's good to see you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And this must be Lily. Al spoke of you often, child." Lily offered a shy smile, clutching a small embroidered purse her grandmother had given her. Grizz watched her carefully, a familiar pang in his chest. He still saw Al in her, not just in her quick, intelligent eyes, but in the quiet strength that radiated from her small frame. They settled into a pew near the front, the preacher taking a seat opposite them. There was no formal sermon, just a conversation, a quiet flow of words that felt more like a shared memory than a lesson. "Al had a vision for that barn," the preacher began, his eyes fixed on Grizz. "He saw more than just a place to fix bikes. He saw community, a haven. He talked about teaching kids, about passing on skills. He always believed in the power of building, Grizz. Not just with metal and grease, but with people." Grizz nodded, the words stirring a dormant echo in his own mind. Al's letters had hinted at this, but the preacher's articulation brought it into sharp focus. He looked at Lily, who was tracing patterns on the polished wood of the pew with her finger. "Lily tells me you're planning something similar," the preacher observed, a knowing glint in his eye. "Something like that," Grizz admitted, a gruffness he couldn't quite shed in his tone. "She's got a good head for engines, says we need a real workshop." The preacher chuckled softly. "That sounds like Al. Always pushing boundaries, always seeing potential where others saw ruin. He used to say, 'Grizz, the truest strength isn't in how much you can lift, but in how much you can build.' He meant friendships, community, a better future." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, allowing Grizz to absorb them. The silence was not uncomfortable, but contemplative. It gave Grizz time to process the weight of Al's unspoken dreams, now being articulated by another. You know, Al and I used to talk about the concept of legacy, the preacher continued, his gaze returning to Grizz. Most men think of it as what they leave behind, but Al always saw it as what they build forward, not just for themselves, but for others. He understood that sometimes the greatest act of love is to empower someone else to carry on a dream that began with you. Grizz felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling that was both comforting and challenging. He thought of the barn, of Lily's sketches, of the shared vision that had begun to take root between them. He realized then that Al hadn't just entrusted him with Lily's well-being, but with the continuation of his own spirit, his dreams. He'd be proud of you, Grizz, the preacher said, his voice soft but firm. Proud of the man you've become, and proud of the man you're becoming. And he'd be over the moon about what you and Lily are building together. He rose from the pew, signaling the end of their conversation. As they walked out into the sunlight, the world seemed a little brighter, the air a little crisper. The preacher clasped Grizz's shoulder, a silent benediction. Remember, Grizz, he said, his eyes twinkling. Sometimes the best sermons aren't spoken from the pulpit, but built with your own two hands. Back on the bike, with Lily nestled securely behind him, Grizz felt a shift within him. The weight of his promise to Al hadn't lessened, but it had transformed. It was no longer a burden of solitary responsibility, but a shared journey, a collaborative endeavor. The barn, which had once represented a dusty corner of his property, now hummed with the silent promise of creation, a testament to a legacy not just inherited, but actively built. He glanced in his rearview mirror at Lily, her small face illuminated by the passing sunlight, and a new kind of peace settled in his heart. They were building something together, something real, something that would honor Al in the most profound way. A drawing at the wall. The crisp autumn air, redolent with damp earth and decaying leaves, swirled around Grizz as he confronted the weathered concrete wall. More than mere masonry, it was a chronicle of remembrance, a mosaic of engraved names, each denoting a life curtailed, a sacrifice rendered. The Veterans Memorial, typically a sanctuary of quiet introspection, throbbed with an unfamiliar vibrancy today. A handful of families drifted, their hushed conversations punctuated by sporadic sobs. Lily's small hand, warm in his, tightened. He reciprocated the squeeze, a silent affirmation. Dad said, "This is where heroes rest," she whispered, her gaze tracing the endless lines of appellations. Her voice, usually bright and inquisitive, was muted, a reverential tone that clutched at Grizz's heart. He knelt, meeting her gaze, the rough stone pressing into his denim-clad knee. "He was right, darlin'," Grizz rumbled, his voice hoarse. His calloused finger brushed a name, not Al's, but another, comrade lost too soon, decades past. The sheer volume of sorrow encased within these slabs was nearly stifling, a heavy shroud upon the living. Lily, however, gravitated toward an unblemished section, a pristine expanse awaiting fresh narratives, new tributes. She produced a small, folded paper from her pocket, a crayon drawing. It was a simple depiction, a stick figure man with a wide, beaming face, clasping the hand of a smaller stick figure girl with wild, untamed hair. Behind them, a motorcycle, unmistakable with its gleaming chrome and broad handlebars, was rendered with surprising precision. The hues were vivid, a hopeful blue sky, vibrant green grass, and figures in cheerful reds and yellows. "This is us," Lily declared, her voice regaining a hint of its usual animation. "Daddy drew it for me. He said we'd all ride together someday." She looked up at Grizz, her eyes wide and earnest. "Can we put it here, Grizz? So everyone knows Daddy's still with us?" Grizz's throat constricted. Her innocent plea, her unwavering conviction in her father's enduring presence, was at once a potent comfort and a fresh ache. He pictured Al, seated at a worn kitchen table, sketching this very image, his mind brimming with dreams of a future he would never inhabit. The motorcycle's sharp definition attested to Al's fervor, a zeal Grizz now inherited. "Yeah, darling," he managed, his voice thick. "We can put it right here." From his jacket, he extracted a roll of heavy-duty tape, a vestige from years of roadside repairs. With meticulous care, he smoothed the drawing against the cool, unmarked concrete, pressing firmly on each corner until it clung perfectly. The vibrant colors blazed against the gray, a burst of vitality on a canvas of remembrance. Lily stepped back, admiring her handiwork, a small, contented smile gracing her lips. "Now everyone will know." A woman, her face etched with a familiar sorrow, paused nearby, her gaze falling upon Lily's drawing. She had observed them for several minutes, her eyes lingering on Grizz, a flicker of recognition in their depths. She approached cautiously, a small bouquet of white lilies clutched in her hand. "That's a beautiful drawing," she said softly, her voice raspy. "Your daddy must have loved you very much." Lily nodded, a shy smile playing on her lips. "He did. He loved bikes, too." The woman's eyes shifted to Grizz, a query in their depths. "Are you Al's friend?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Grizz straightened, feeling the familiar weight of Al's memory settle upon his shoulders. "I am," he confirmed, his gaze steady. "Grizz." "I'm Sarah," she replied, extending a trembling hand. "Al's cousin. I recognized the bike in the drawing, and I saw you here a few times over the years. I heard you were looking after Lily." A tear escaped her eye, tracing a path down her cheek. "Thank you. He'd be so proud." The words, simple and heartfelt, resonated deep within Grizz. It wasn't merely gratitude, it was an acknowledgement, a recognition of the sacred trust he carried. He looked at Lily, then back at the drawing, the stick figure family, on their brightly colored motorcycle. The preacher's words echoed in his mind. "It's about building something, Grizz. A future, not just honoring the past." He understood now that creating that future wasn't solely about the workshop, about shaping metal and imparting skills. It was about forging connections, cultivating a community around Lily, around Al's memory, around the shared aspiration of a life lived fully. Even in the shadow of sorrow, Sarah's presence, her quiet empathy, solidified that conviction. Al's legacy wasn't exclusively his, it was a tapestry, woven from all the lives he had touched, and Grizz was now a robust and enduring thread in that fabric. "He is," Grizz said, his voice clearer now, stronger. "He is proud." He took Sarah's hand, a silent promise passing between them. The drawing, a beacon of innocent hope, stood as testament on the cold stone, a testament not merely to a fallen hero, but to the enduring power of love and the promise of a shared future. The wall, once a somber monument to what was lost, now held a glimmer of what was yet to be built. Living memory. The crisp, late autumn air, redolent with decaying leaves and the distant urban hum, streamed past Grizz as he navigated his bike along the winding country roads. Sarah, perched behind him, occasionally gestured, her internal map unfurling. Lily had preceded them, securely nestled in her car seat within Sarah's SUV, driven by a mutual friend. This picnic was more than a mere gathering. It was a vibrant tribute to Al's birthday. Not a somber memorial, but a celebration forged in shared laughter and communal warmth. They arrived at a sprawling park, its edges ablaze with the season's fiery palette. A venerable oak, its branches a tangle of ancient gnarled fingers, marked their rendezvous. Already, a small assembly had formed. Al's parents, their faces softened by time and sorrow, yet illuminated by a nascent serenity. A few of Al's former army comrades, their easy camaraderie palpable in their jovial exchanges. And a scattering of Al's extended family, many of whom were meeting Grizz for the first time. Lily, a bright splash of pink in her jacket, was already engrossed in a game of tag with two other children, her gleeful peals a bright counterpoint to the rustling foliage. Grizz dismounted, the familiar heft of his jacket a comforting presence. He watched Lily for a moment, a profound warmth blossoming in his chest. This was Al's vision, his ultimate fight. Sarah approached, a wicker basket swinging from her hand. "Everyone made it, it seems," she murmured, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "Even Aunt Carol, who typically never stirs from home." She gestured towards a stout woman in a floral dress, already deep in conversation with Al's mother. Grizz nodded, absorbing the tableau. He recognized a handful of faces from the memorial, but many were new. A fleeting current of apprehension, a sense of being an outsider, rippled through him, quickly eclipsed by the genuine smiles and welcoming nods he received. This wasn't merely an assembly. It was a delicate intertwining of lives, each irrevocably touched by Al. As the afternoon unfurled, the picnic progressed with effortless grace. Sandwiches, salads, and homemade cookies circulated freely. Al's father, a quiet man with perceptive eyes, shared childhood anecdotes, his voice infused with tender affection. An army buddy recounted a daring wartime escapade, eliciting chuckles and disbelieving headshakes. Grizz found himself drawn into conversations, contributing his own recollections of Al, not just the hardened soldier, but the steadfast friend, the man who yearned for a family. He observed Lily, at one point nestled on Al's mother's lap, captivated by a story. The older woman's hand gently stroked Lily's hair, a silent testament to the burgeoning bond. It was a stark contrast to the desolate image of Lily he'd first encountered, a powerful affirmation of shared memory and collective love. Later, as the sun began its gradual descent, painting the sky in a vibrant tapestry of fiery oranges and purples, Sarah gathered everyone. She held aloft a small, well-worn, leather-bound journal. "Al's letters," she announced, her voice thick with emotion. He also kept a journal. Some of it speaks of his hopes for the future, for Lily. A profound hush settled over the group. Grizz felt a familiar twinge of grief, yet it was interwoven with a rising sense of anticipation. He understood the significance of these letters, not only for himself, but for everyone present. They were a window into Al's very soul, a living testament to his enduring spirit. Sarah began to read, her voice steady despite the subtle tremor in her hands. She selected excerpts that unveiled Al's aspirations for Lily, his desire for her to experience love and laughter, to be enveloped by family. There were passages expressing pride in his service, but also a profound yearning for a peaceful life, for a place to call home. As she read, a wave of emotion washed over the group. Tears streamed freely, not tears of despair, but of remembrance, of shared affection, of a collective understanding of the man they had lost and the legacy he had bequeathed. Then Sarah turned a page, and a different inflection entered her voice. "And then there are these," she said, her gaze settling on Grizz. "About you, Grizz." Grizz felt a jolt. This was unexpected. A knot tightened in his stomach, a blend of apprehension and a strange, powerful pride. Sarah read Al's words, a vivid chronicle of their friendship, their shared trials, the unyielding loyalty that bound them. Al wrote of Grizz's quiet strength, his unwavering moral compass, his fierce protectiveness. He described Grizz as the brother he never had, the man he trusted with his life, and with Lily's future, should fate intervene. As Sarah concluded, a profound silence enveloped the park. Every eye converged on Grizz. He felt exposed, yet strangely at peace. He looked at Lily, now gazing at him with wide, trusting eyes. He met the poignant understanding in Al's parents' faces. He saw Sarah, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Then Al's father slowly rose, approached Grizz, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Al always had good judgment," he said, his voice raspy with emotion. "He chose well, son. He chose well." A ripple of murmurs, of affirmation, swept through the group. Grizz felt a lump in his throat, too large to swallow. He wasn't merely Al's friend anymore. He was a vital thread in the rich tapestry of Al's family, a living embodiment of Al's trust, a guardian of his legacy. He glanced at Lily, a small hand reaching for his, and knew, with absolute certainty, that he was exactly where he belonged. This gathering wasn't just about remembering Al. It was about forging a future, together, in his honor.